committee ranking came out last night, and I think we've got maybe like 3 or 4 scenarios that feel very realistic, and everything else feels very unrealistic. But Ari, right before the show, you were explaining that this is much easier than people think. So I'm going to give you the floor before we get to our Wendy's Saucy Takes, because it is a Wendy's Saucy Take Wednesday. All of our Saucy Takes relate to the playoff. But I'm going to give you the floor. Tell the folks why this is easier than they think it is.
Well, before I go on it's not going to be a rant, it's just an explanation of how I was feeling last night before I went to bed. Let me start off by saying I don't really think I have a problem with literally anything the committee did on Tuesday night. Like, I don't know if you guys do, but given the circumstances of what they have to deal with here, it's a 12-team field. It's very complicated. There are going to be teams in the 13 to 16 range that are similar. You have to pick one. But in terms of the consistency of what they did here, I'm fine with it. Like, do we agree that there was nothing egregious about the actual thing? There's nothing to freak out about?
Okay. Miami's freaking out and South Carolina's freaking out because they're probably out. If you have no dog in the hunt, you're not freaking out because you could have gone pretty much either way with any of these.
So, okay, I need to grow as a human because, of course, those teams are freaking out, and I'll let them freak out. But the way you get into the playoff is simple, Andy, and there are 2 ways to do it. Sometimes it's in your control, and sometimes it's not in your control. You can go the easy way, which is don't schedule any hard non-conference games and be lucky like Indiana was in the conference that you play in and not play anybody good or play one good team. If you do that, you must have an 11-1 or better record in order to get in, because when you don't have quality wins and you don't have strength of schedule, the only thing that matters is your wins and loss record. The second you lose a second game in that scenario, as Miami can attest, you're out. So that's the first route. The second route is to play the SEC schedule, which is tough non-conference games a lot of the time and 3 or 4 top 15 teams throughout the regular season. You can do it this way, but if you do it this way, you have to win at least 2 of your 4 or 5 games. That means you have ones, a larger, you have 2 or 3 of the big 5 games you play. That way, you have more margin for error when you are navigating your schedule. So some teams have different routes, but the criteria for those teams is different. If Indiana had 2 losses right now, their schedule would come into play and they would be hanging out in the back with Miami. The reason why Indiana with a bad schedule is in is because they did not lose. So it's either you play a tough schedule, you lose a few, but you win a few big ones, or you play a bad schedule and you just don't lose, or you lose only once. It is literally that simple. You can't have both. South Carolina is in this position right now because it wants to have both. It wants to play a tough schedule. It wants to lose all of its biggest games that could have been tent poles on its resume, and it wants to also still get in because they have strength of schedule. But you can't not have either. So you either have to have a great record or you have to have quality wins that the committee can hang their hat on. And that is it. There's no conspiracy. There's nothing to do with what color your uniforms are or what conference you play in. If you have a tough schedule, whether you play in the Mountain West, whether you play in the SEC or the AFC North, you have to win your big games and they will forgive your losses. If you play a crappy schedule, whether you play in the Mountain West, AFC North, or SEC, you have to have a great schedule. You have to have a great record. That's it. And if you go and you look at the way that it's ranked, it's consistent in that thinking. And that's why the Tennessee argument happened, because big wins matter. That's why all that matters are the 2 things I said, your record or your quality. Am I wrong on this?
No, you're right. I want to add something to it. I'll add one thing to it. If you choose the route of play the hard schedule, win the big games, and you lose some games, it's outside your control though. Like, mighty Alabama is in a good spot if SMU beats Clemson. But mighty Alabama is relying on SMU. It's not in their control.
And if you are Clemson, scheduling a harder game and losing it could be the difference between making it and not. So, like, yes, But if you go down the list, and if South Carolina fans are angry, and again, these stats and data points are malleable, you can make them look as good as you want in favor of your team, and South Carolina has done that. But you know in your heart of hearts, whether you would want to admit it publicly or not, that South Carolina simply did not do enough this year to get into the playoff, period. It played a tougher schedule than Indiana, sure, but bemoaning Indiana's schedule is pointless because Indiana's schedule, though much easier, they also navigated it much better than you navigated yours, and that's what matters. So the thing is with Indiana is you can hate Indiana all you want. They're the number one punching bag right now for the SEC, but Indiana had zero margin for error outside of their loss to Ohio State. They didn't have the benefit of losing to Vanderbilt or Kentucky or LSU or whatever. They had to win every single. There's no, they say the problem with the old system is that demanding people to be perfect in order to be considered is too much to ask. But we are literally demanding teams who play with bad schedules the same level of success as we did in the 4-team field to get into the 12-team. So having an easier schedule does not come without drawbacks too. And Miami played an easy-ass schedule, but they are not in the playoff because they beat nobody. And they lost an extra game. So if you're a Miami fan and you're upset that Alabama is going in, understand that the tax that Alabama pays or that you pay for being in the ACC that Alabama does not have to pay is that Alabama has an extra loss it can shoulder than you because they play a much more difficult schedule. So,
well, and in Miami's defense, they did schedule an SEC team out of conference. That SEC team went 7-5, so that doesn't help them as much as it would if that SEC team went 9-3.
And a lot of times too, things like this are out of your control. So, like Indiana didn't know that Michigan was going to stink this year, right? Like they didn't.
Right. We looked at that Indiana schedule and said there's 2 losses right there at the end.
Right.
We just didn't know that Michigan would lose 5 games this season.
And Washington could have been awesome this year. What if Nebraska was 10-2? Like you don't know before the year what you're dealing with. And it's not Indiana's fault they play in the Big Ten and got an easier path coincidentally. The same way it wasn't for Ole Miss. And part of the reason why Ole Miss is out is because they had an advantageous path. Like Alabama played a pound-for-pound tougher schedule than Ole Miss.
Right. And let me ask you this one about Ole Miss and Alabama. Because Ole Miss chose to schedule very easy non-conference games. Alabama tried to schedule a harder one with Wisconsin, didn't necessarily get it. But Alabama's non-conference still winds up being probably harder than Ole Miss's.
Yeah, well, here's the thing that's different.
But what I'm saying is, if Ole Miss had scheduled a heavyweight non-conference game and won it and went 9-3 with the same losses, they'd be over Alabama right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the benefit you get from it. But if they would have lost the game on top of their schedule, they would be definitively out. So there's risk involved.
Right.
Now, the thing that I want people to see too is in the past when the AP poll mattered, and that might be years and years and years ago, but there was a point in time where the AP poll and perception mattered enough to mess with the formula. Going on the road and beating Florida, going on the road and beating Wisconsin would count for something to the people. But in this system, the only rankings that measure quality wins are the rankings that are assembled by the team that's assembling the bracket. So when Wisconsin, though a tougher non-conference schedule opponent than Mercer, you don't get credit for it either way. It helps your strength of schedule metric, but it's not like, oh, well, that must have been a tough place to play, and that was an impressive win. Wisconsin stinks, so you don't get credit. And you can't control that when you're scheduling your non-conference opponents 5 years or 10 years in advance. Right. And you can't control how good teams are in your conference in a given year. Yeah.
Well, like Alabama has Florida State next year. We have no idea if they're going to get this year's Florida State or last year's Florida State. Because those two things are very different.
And the good news about that, though, is that no matter which one you get, your path to the playoff will be reflectant of that. If you get crappy Florida State, then you have an easier game to win, and that's good for you. If you get great Florida State and you beat them, then you have a tent pole at the end of the year. So it doesn't matter whether your schedule is easier or harder. It doesn't matter what conference you're in. It doesn't matter the logo on your helmet, as they're proving with Indiana. What matters is what your path is, whether it's in your control or not, and what you do with that path. And the thing that stinks about this more than anything, Andy, is that entire country is just saying exactly here what RD Cards is saying. They're always helping Alabama. And it's like Alabama happened to be the recipient of that extra spot at the moment. And I'm not sure they're in yet, guys. We're going to get to that later in the show. But Alabama also, despite the fact that they lost 14 or 21-3 and didn't score a touchdown at Oklahoma, also played one of the most difficult schedules in the country and won games against teams that are holding them up. And guess what? Indiana didn't have to go play Georgia. They didn't have to go play Tennessee. They didn't play the teams that are in contention or in the playoff the way that Alabama did. So, of course, Alabama gets mulligans for losses that didn't present themselves. So not every schedule is created equally, absolutely, but not everybody's resume and threshold to get in the playoff is either. And it's really not that hard to me.
Yeah. I like it. That is a very rational explanation that will still piss people off, because I think in general, people don't like the subjectivity of it. I keep telling you, if you don't like the subjectivity, there's a way to make it more objective. You're not going to like that either. It's a super league that looks like the NFL, top 40 teams. They balance it out with divisions. So if you keep screaming about that, don't worry. They'll make it happen for you. But you probably won't like it if you're a fan of an ACC or a Big 12 team, because they probably won't be included. So just pointing that out. If you don't like this, what comes next, you're probably going to hate more. So just be aware.
But at the end of the day, though, if you're not in the playoff, you only have yourself to blame. Period.
Right. Win more games. If you lost 3 games and you're mad because your team missed the playoff, win more games. If you lost 2 games and you played a crappy schedule and you're mad because the team missed the playoff, win more games.
And at the end of the day, lovingly from me, winning a national championship is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And you don't.
It is.
And I know that you get the benefit now for some teams of being good instead of elite to try to compete for one. But we're talking about the mechanism. Let's not lose sight.
Yeah.
The mechanism for crowning the national champion. There is a standard that needs to be set in order to do that. And if your team is on the outside looking in, truth is they probably haven't come close to doing that. Even if they came close to edging in the end of the field,
right,
they're not close to being the standard that is necessary.
And if you get in and you win 4 games against the teams that are in the tournament, you've earned it.
And if you're not in, your schedule during the regular season has already shown us that you're not equipped to do that, like it or not. So, in my opinion, if you have 3 losses in 12 games and you're not going to win 4 in a row against the elite teams in the country, I don't think we're going to see it.
We'll find out. We haven't seen one of these things play out.
But then
we heard Dabo. Hey, do we have the Dabo video, Producer River? Let's play that Dabo video.
Like, why not? I mean, it's just football. We got a bunch of good football players. All you got to do is win the game you're playing. Why not? I mean, somebody's going to win it. You know, and you know, we're fortunate enough to win this game. You get a ticket to Willy Wonka's factory, right? You get to go. You know, on the magic elevator. You know, and you get to be in the tournament. And so, if we're fortunate to win this game and get that opportunity, anything can happen. Anything can happen. I think we were the first 15-0 team, national championship team. Maybe we could be the first 3-loss team. Boy, that would upset some people. God, y'all have to take a bunch of stuff back that y'all say every day. That would really disappoint some people. But why not? Why not?
You might have a bye.
I love the Willy Wonka. Like, who's Veruca Salt in this? Of the teams trying to make the playoff that are on the bubble? Is it Alabama? I want it now, Daddy.
It's been a long time since I've seen that movie. Is there a magic elevator in it?
There is. It goes like multiple directions. It's
yeah,
great.
it goes multiple directions. Yeah. My wife has a gluten allergy, so every time we go to a restaurant, I tell the waitress or waiter that if she eats gluten, that she turns into Augustus Gloop, and she really loves that.
That solves the problem every time. Violet turns into a blueberry, right? So, but that's Dabo, and he makes the point. They could be the first 3-loss national champ. Also, the fact that they've lost 3 games suggests that they probably won't win 4 games in a row, and it might have to be 4 games in a row. Probably will have to be